welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing the Sheera bag by Tryxus Design. I think I stayed pretty true to the pattern, although I've only got 4 bag feet, not 5, because that's where my logo sits, so obviously that doesn't work out. But apart from that, I've done waterproof lining. We've done the straps a different way to what I normally do, so they're a little bit thinner, but they're still lovely. And then inside, it's got a zipper pocket, and then on the other side, it's got a slip pocket that I have divided into 1/3 versus 2/3. So if you would like to see how I make this bag, stay tuned. Alrighty, so let's get started. So I've got all of my hardware in my Lord of the Rings bowl. You need 2 D-rings, 4 square rings, 1 strap adjuster, 4 or 5 bag feet, depending on how you do it. I do 4 because my logo goes in the middle where the 5th one would be. 2 zippers and 2 swivel clasps. So I'm not going to start where the pattern starts because I don't want to. So I'm going to start with the top zipper part. No real reason, it's just sitting on my table. So we're going to take one of our lining pieces and put that right sides up. And then we're going to take our zipper and put that on top. Now, if you're new to bag making, grab some clips and clip those 2 together. We all know how I don't like to clip in 3s. I find it tricky. So I'll clip those, and then I'm going to take my top piece. Now I'm using vinyl, so I haven't interfaced it. And then I'm going to put that right sides down. I'm also using waterproof canvas because my interfacing has still not arrived, although I did get a thing saying it should be today, but I wasn't going to wait. So we're using waterproof canvas as lining, and now I'm just going to sew up against the zipper. Like that, and then back stitch. And then I'm going to swivel that around and pull just the top layer over. And then I'm going to top stitch along there, but I'm going to make my stitch length longer so it's more decorative. I love a good top stitch, but I like it when the stitch is longer so it's neater. Also, it won't perforate the vinyl as much, so you're less likely to wreck your vinyl. And then we're going to back stitch the end and then trim your tails. So that's one side. But as you can see, the waterproof lining is going to get in my way. So I'm going to come over and I'm just going to finger press this open. Now, if you're not using this, you should iron if it's fabric so that it's out of the way, because you don't want to accidentally sew it into the other side of the seam. So I'm going to line all 3 up at the top. I'm going to go back to a joining stitch length. Now, if you don't like switching between stitch lengths, you could stitch both sides on and then top stitch both sides. I just like to do it while I'm already here. You always like to stop with your needle in the down position. Then we're going to back stitch, we're going to swivel, pull this open, and then crank it up and top stitch it. So I am still going to back stitch. You always like to stop in the down position with your needle so that you can readjust. And then back stitch. Now before we forget, because it is very commonplace to forget, we're going to put the zipper pull on now. So you're just going to crack the zip open just a little bit. And then I'm going to feed one side in. And then the other side in. And then I stick my finger behind it and pull down each side. And then just pull the zipper on. And I'm going to leave it in the middle. Next, we've got our D-ring connectors. So I've already put double-sided tape on all of the vinyl pieces. I actually remembered today. So I'm going to fold both sides into the center, like this. And then if you want to, you can top stitch them, or you can just grab your D-ring and I'm just going to tack mine in place. And then grab the second one and do the same thing, because most of this will be in the seam allowance, so I'm not really too worried. So that you'll only have that little bit sticking out. I am still going to back stitch though, because I don't want this to come out. And then trim your tails. And then I'm just going to push this one out of the way. Line that up on the edge and use 2 Wonder Clips to clip it in the center. So it should sit over the zipper. 1 and 2. Now that that's done, we can pop that aside. And we're going to move on to the front pieces. So I've picked this really pretty fabric that's been in my stash forever. I finally had a nice vinyl to go with it. I actually forgot I had this vinyl. So I've already put the double-sided tape on. So what we're going to do is fold it all into the center. And make sure you put your rubbish in the bin as you go, because a cleaner workspace is easier to deal with. So I'm folding both sides into the center. Now, if you've got stubborn vinyl, just rub it on the edge of your table, and that helps to crease it so it won't come undone. You can also use a like a plastic scraper along the edges, like this. You just push down, whatever suits you, I guess. So doing one side and then the other. Now it doesn't matter if it's not 100% perfectly in the center, as we're going to sew all of this down. But if you struggle with the center, before you stick your double-sided tape on, just draw a line in the middle. And then you can just line everything up to that line. Like this. I'm just going to rub mine on the table. This is a pretty soft vinyl, so it should stay where I want it to anyway. But I just rub it on the table just in case. It also does help it to sit flatter, which will look nice later. Okay. Along the edge. So now they're all done. Now I've got my pattern piece with me because it's got the strap connector part. But I did need to bring up the pattern so that I can see how far up until we put our D-rings, which is here somewhere. Okay. So I'm just going to use a friction pen, which is erasable. You can also use a Chaco pen or a chalk pencil or whatever makes you happy. I am just marking where the strap goes on all pieces. So that I can guide the strap into the right place. So I'm just laying this down and then folding it back a little bit so I can see where the lines line up, like that. And then I'm going to repeat on the other side. Now I did waste a little bit of fabric when I made this bag because I wanted to position the birds directly in the center. But out of, I don't even know how much I had, but there will be a matching wallet in Wallet Week, which is next week. So I've cut that out ready to go. Because sometimes it's just nice to have matching things. Okay, so that's where all my straps go. Now I just need to take a ruler. So I'm going to take my awesome little ruler that was a gift in the Swatsea, because it's great. And I'm just going to measure down to here. Is it here? Where's that pattern piece? To the stitch line. Okay, so I'm going to do it right here, there, and mark a line. And then I'm going to come to this one, mark the same line, and then this one, and the same line. I'm just going to repeat this for all 4. And that's the bin man going past. Okay. So now that I've got my mark, I'm going to stitch from the bottom upwards like this. So I'm going to line up the bottom here. I'm going to stitch 2 stitches and back stitch to lock it all in. And then I'm going to stitch up to here. And then turn and go across. And then down the other way. Like that. So I've only kind of stitched on half. Then I can take my square ring, slide it on, and then we're going to start from the top. One more, swivel, stitch across, and up, and back stitch. Always with the back stitch. And that is now 1 on. All the stitching's neat. That little bit won't matter that I haven't stitched those edges. There's no way that that can come undone. So we're going to line up the next one, do it all again. We're going to back stitch. We're going to come up to the line. We're going to swivel and go across, and then back down the other side. We're going to back stitch. We're going to pull it out. Now, if you wanted to, you could chain stitch these. You could do like all the bottoms and then all the tops. But I'm doing this way because it's slightly more cohesive for the beginner. But if I was speed sewing this bag, that's what I would do. In fact, I might even do another video where I speed sew this. Needle down, pivot, up the top and back stitch. So then we're going to grab the next one. We're going to line it up in the spots. We're going to start our back stitch. We're going to come up to the line. Don't be afraid to have to check where the line is. Better than guessing. Across. Down. Pivot. Down. Trim your tails. Slide your square ring on. Now you could use D-rings if you wanted your straps to be removable, or even if you just wanted some extra hardware on your strap. So you could put swivel clasps on your handles as like an extra detail. I don't think that would work with this fabric so much. I think that'd be slightly too much gold going on, but you could do it. So if you don't have square rings, just use D-rings, or you can use round rings. Okay, there it is. Oops, and now I just threw that on the floor, so I'm going to have to pause the video. That was not ideal. So I'm going to line it up. I'm going to stitch to where my finger is. A little bit more. Pivot. Down. And now I have to pause to go and get that ring. Alright, got it. So we're going to slide it on. We're going to line up that top bit. Always with the back stitching, guys. Or lock stitch, where you stitch 3 stitches and then lift it up and do it all again. Either is fine, as long as you just don't leave them hanging. Okay, so that's now our rings on, which look fabulous. I am now going to take the bottom accent pieces, and this is where your clipping comes in handy. So I'm going to start, this is what we want. So the idea is that it's going to sit there like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center, because it's always easier to line things up in the center. I'm just going to clip a really little bit. You can also just draw a line. And then I'm going to put, so the easiest way to think of it is right sides together. So this is why we need the center, because it's a curve and the curves feel like they're going in opposite directions. So I'm going to clip in the center, and then I'm going to do one each side of the center. And what that does is that avoids it being able to slip and move. And then we're just going to go and move towards the edge. So you might need a lot of clips, especially as you get closer to the edge, because of the curve increases. And then that last one's going to be a little bit tricky. So even if you want to, you can put one on the other end to hold it in place while you're still clipping everything together. So up we go. You also want to clip it so it hasn't got any lumps in the seam allowance. That is very important. We do not want bumpy seam allowances, because that'll cause ripples. So even though it looks up this end like it's all wonky, underneath the clips is nice and flat. And that's the part we're going to be stitching, so that's the part we care about. So I'm just going to clip here, and then the center of this one as well. And like I said, you don't have to clip it, you can just mark it with, I don't know, anything. And then we're going to put it right sides together so that the curves look like they're going in opposite directions. And then start clipping. And from the center, you want to clip in both directions. Like this. And like I said, right at that edge it starts getting a little bit more tricky, because the curve gets deeper right at that edge. But you can clip the very edge and then everything kind of sits in. Now, see this lump here? This, if I don't smooth it out, is going to cause a little kind of dint, I guess. So I can tell if I stitch that the way it is, it's not going to work, and I'm going to have to unpick it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ease that little lump further down, and now it's gone. It took more clips, but that's okay. There's no right or wrong amount of clips. And the more advanced you get, if you make this bag over and over and over, you will most likely need less and less clips, to the point where you could probably do this without it. But since this is the first time I'm ever making it, we're going to use lots of clips, because I want it to sit the way it's meant to. So I'm going to just come and clip that end, and then just push that excess in, like so. And again, I've got that same problem, so I clipped it wrong, which is funny, because the first one was fine. Okay, so we're going to go back to a joining stitch length. And I always sew with the bulk of the bag out of the machine, because I find it easier. So we're going to stitch, we're going to back stitch. We're going to put Scully over here. We're going to make sure there's no lumps where we're sewing. And I like to tidy up my clips as I go because a messy workspace is a lot more difficult to deal with. And then backstitch at the end. Now I'm not going to pull that out, I'm going to chain stitch. So I'm going to grab the second one and just start straight at it. We're going to backstitch at the start, as always, and then work our way down. Now, if you struggle with this particular part, because I know it's not an easy thing to do, what you can do is you can lay this over the top and just top stitch it. Just make sure that you've got the right amount of seam allowance where it's overlapping. It will just mean that you'll have a raw edge, which we don't, well, we don't want, but if this is too complicated, an easier way is to just lay it over the top and top stitch it. And that will still work. Now, I got a little tuck on this one. See right here? See that little kind of pinch? But because it's not even a whole stitch worth, I can actually smooth that out and it will go away. If it's a big pinch and there's lots of overlap, you won't be able to just smooth it out. But this one isn't even. So I'm going to go up to my size 4 stitch length, and I'm now going to top stitch this down. So I'm going to do it 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I'm going slowly and deliberately. And then I'm going to back stitch. You won't see the back stitches because they're in the seam. And then we're going to fold this one down. Same thing, smooth it out. There's actually no tucks. It just kind of looks like it. But that's also because this is a thinner vinyl than the Pacifica that I normally use. So when the vinyl's thicker, it's less likely to show false tucks. You're also more likely to get real ones. It's like a bit of a trade-off. I got this vinyl, so I know someone's going to ask me, so I'll tell you. I got this vinyl from an upholsterer. So there was a guy going out of business and moving interstate, so he was just selling all his stuff. So that's now done. Now I'm just going to go and iron the fleece on the back of both of these pieces, and then we'll be right back. I've now got fleece on the back of both of those, and I also put fleece on the side panels. I could have chosen fleece or my hefty interfacing, but I thought the fleece would give it a nice little fluffy kind of a feel. If this was thicker vinyl, I wouldn't necessarily have to put it on, but I did because this is a softer vinyl. It's not necessarily that it's thinner, it's just softer. So I'm now going to take the vinyl accents, and I chose to sew these on now instead of before because it's going to help hold the fleece in place rather than it just floating through nowhere. So I'm just going to put a strip of double-sided tape roughly in the middle. This is just to kind of tack it in place while I stitch it down. Hello, puppy. He's very, very needy lately. Not that I blame him, hey? He's just staring at me. Unshut. Alright, so I'm going to pop these in the corner, like this. Oh, hello. He loves attention, the puppy, don't you? So I'm sticking the accents on into the corner. I'm going to do all 4 and I'm going to chain stitch them so that I waste less thread and it's a little bit quicker. There we go. know. Off you go. Go on. Go chill out somewhere. So I'm just going to stitch nicely along the curve and then tack down the corners for easier sewing later. It's always easier when things are one piece instead of several. And then I'm just going to pivot it round and do it right on the edge. Now this bit doesn't need to be neat because you're not going to see it. Although it is good practice if you want to like practice being neat. And I am going to still backstitch to lock it in. Oh, I was going to chain stitch these, wasn't I? It's funny, I sew a little bit differently on versus off camera. On camera, I try to make it as simple as possible, and off camera, I try to make it as quick as possible. And all my pieces, when I'm off camera, I just kind of sew as many little bits together as possible. I start with all the little bits and then work my way up. I don't know why. Right, so to chain stitch, you would just swing this round and then just start here and off you go. And then when you get, you know, a couple of stitches in, you can just trim it off. Now you can leave these accents off if you want to see more of your print. But I kind of like it with the print that I chose. There is a lot of vinyl on this bag, but I kind of like it. This would also look really nice if you did an embroidery design right in the center. Or if you quilted the fabric. That would look cool too. I'm recently a little bit obsessed with quilting fabric because I've been getting a lot of orders for it. And it's just kind of fun. The bits you don't see, I always seem to sew them a little bit quicker. It just doesn't necessarily matter. Alright, so that is now our piece is complete. And because I've stitched this on, it's just like a little bit of added protection to hold that fleece in place. If you wanted to, you could also stitch the whole way around the edge, especially if your fleece wasn't fusible. So you would basting spray it on and then just stitch the whole edge so it stays in place. Another thing you could do right now is put some rivets into here and then that would hold that on as well. Lots of different options. But we are going to move on. So I'm now going to take my side pieces and my base piece. I have already embroidered my logo on. I figure you didn't really need to watch me do that. It's the same as always. So I'm just going to mark where I'm going to put my bag feet in. I don't want them too far in, but I also don't want them too far out because then they'll get in the way. So I change this up according to what bag I'm doing. I kind of eyeball it, but I make sure that they're all symmetrical. Some bag patterns have it in, like on the pattern piece, to save you the maths. But then again, I don't always do what they say because this pattern has one in the center. But if I put one in the center, I'll wreck my logo. So now I'm just going to punch the holes. This is a 2mm hole punch for those that wish to go and purchase one. I love it. I got mine from Green Beans. You can get them from eBay. I think Snaps Australia has them. Pretty sure Amazon in America has them. So I'm going to push the post from the back to the front. And I'm going to put all 4 in. Like this. And then I'm going to flip it over and just click the feet on. Like that. And then I can use my press to squish them down. And my child just woke up. I've also got some base stabilizer on this bottom piece, which I embroidered on to help hold, and then also the bag feeder holding it in place. I did glue it on, but very rarely does that last forever. So now I'm just going to, with bag feet up, I'm going to take my side pieces and put them face down. And I'm just going to stitch along this edge. I want to go down to a joining stitch length, which for me is 2.5. We're going to back stitch and then stitch along. And then if you want to, you can flip this under and top stitch on the bag base part. I've cranked it back up to a 4 to look nice. But that's going to hold that seam down. It's going to give a nice little detail on the base. It's also going to help practice top stitching in somewhere that's less likely to be seen. So we're going to stitch, we're going to back stitch. We're going to go across, we're going to back stitch again. Pivot it round. I've got the needle down, but it's not attached to the actual fabric. And then I'm just going to make sure that that seam points towards the base. You could also open it and top stitch both sides if you wanted to, as for a different look. But that is going to help when we construct the bag. So that looks nice. So now we need our top pieces. We're going to line that up along the top. And I'm going to not stitch my lining yet. So the easiest way to do this, go back to your joining stitch length. So I'm going to stitch this way up to, but not over the zipper. So I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to move them before I knock them off. Up to the zipper and then back stitch. And then we're going to flip it. You could have also used binding for this bag. That would have worked as well. I'm back stitching. I'm stitching up to but not over the zipper, and I'm also not stitching over the lining. And then I'm going to put my clips back on in the center to hold that in place. So now from the outside it looks like this, but from the inside I haven't stitched any of that lining. Come over to this end, we're going to do the same thing again. Now you can see here I've got a little bit of excess of my fleece. Sometimes it stretches. Apparently it didn't stick as well as I thought it did, but that's okay. We're going to line it up in the center again. Move the D-ring out of the way. You don't want to stitch over that either. Back stitch. Stitch up to, but not over the zipper. And then I'm just going to put that clip back on. Flip it over. And go this way. Put the clip back on. And we now have a circle. Very wonky circle, but a circle nonetheless. So I'm going to pop that aside because now we need to build the lining one. So again, we're going to grab our 2 side pieces, which are in here somewhere, and a base piece. That's a pocket. That's a pocket. Oh, there it is. Oh, hello, beautiful. Alright, I don't like my chances, but we're going to see how much more I can get sewn. So, we're going to take our base piece and put it right sides up, and then I'm going to take a lining piece and put it right sides down, obviously matching the fat end to the fat end, and then we're going to stitch. Now, if you want to be fancy, you can take this end and bend it around so that you can chain stitch the whole bottom. Now I wouldn't do this with the outside because it's not flexible enough, but the lining is much more pliable. So you can just stitch both of the ends at the same time, like that. And then we're just going to trim it open, trim your tails. Now I'm not going to top stitch this in, but I am going to finger press it over. Now if this was like a cotton with some woven interfacing, I would iron this over. You can even tack it at the edges if you need to, if you think it won't stay, or you can just remember to do it later. So it just sits nicer if you've got it flat like that. So now we're going to take our big circle and we're going to open this out, and I'm going to stitch the side bits of the lining together. So I'm going to start here, I'm going to line it up, we're going to stitch, we're going to back stitch. You're going to get it as close as you can, and then trim off all the tails, otherwise you end up with a really big mess later. I know I'm always saying trim your tails, but this is one of those times where if you don't, it just looks like a big matted mess, and it gets very frustrating to deal with. And we don't want that. This is meant to be fun. So I'm just going to move that other clip over, flatten this out, stitch it shut, up to, but not over the zipper. You get as close as you can. Trim off all of those tails so that we don't have to stare at them, like that. And then I'm going to flatten this out so that that side's flat and the top's flat. And we're going to stitch over all of it. Now do this slowly because it is quite thick. If you're on a domestic and you're worried, you can just switch out your D-rings to have fabric instead of vinyl. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to stitch, I'm going to back stitch. I've got my hand physically on the D-ring so that I know it's not going to flip back into my stitching and then snap a needle. Because my biggest fear about snapping needles is not the actual snapping, but it flicking up into my eye. Because if I go blind, I can't sew. So now I've gone across, I'm going to now angle down a little bit. I'm kind of going to do a zigzag along this. Because if you're using your shoulder strap, this little section is going to take the whole weight of the bag. So I'm just going to zigzag down like that, and then we're just going to back stitch. But we're only doing the middle section. So you still want to have these edges free, like that. My child's obsessed with something called Booba at the moment. It's like this weird little alien monster dude. So from the inside, it's nice and smooth. And then from the outside. Now I'm off to turn on Booba. I am going to do that to the other side, and I will do it off camera, and then I will come back. Right here. So that is all done, except I have just noticed that I have tagged the wrong bit. So give me a second while I unpick that. Right. So I'm just going to stitch over that last little, oh no, it's outside of the stitcher, seam allowance. So that actually won't matter. Excellent. So I'm going to pop that aside. We're going to go on to the lining pieces. So in my tub, I've got a zipper pocket. I've got 2 slip pockets. And the main bits I need to put them to, and everything else that's left will be straps. And obviously construction, but still. So I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to do my slip pocket differently. So they've got it written so you do this and then we put binding along the top edge. Instead, I'm just going to stitch them together and flip it over, because I think that it will be too thick for the fabric that I've used. And I would like my pocket to sit as flat as possible. I'm going to stitch along. I'm making sure I'm back stitching at both ends. Trim off the tail. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to press it open flat. So this is the best way to get this done. So we press it open so it's flat. If you've got cotton, use an iron. Then you bend it over and you'll find that it will fold directly on that crease much, much easier. So now I'm going to top stitch. I might crank it up to a longer top stitch, and I'm going to do it at 1/8 of an inch, which is the middle of the right side of my foot. That's how I gauge that. With top stitching, oh, I just ran out of bobbin thread. I heard that. You don't have to do it at 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. Whatever's a convenient way for you to measure it on your machine, so long as it's consistent, will be fine. So just because I'm doing it at 1/8 of an inch does not mean you have to copy. You can do it however you like. All right, new bobbin. So I'm going to go 2 stitches back. So I'm going to stitch, I'm going to go back a hole, and then I'm just going to keep stitching. And that's going to lock that in for me. And then I can just come back and trim off the tails. Now there's usually 3 tails because there's usually a bit of a bobbin tail going on at the back. I'm just going to trim it off. You can even grab a lighter and singe those ends just so that they're super flush. Always try and use the blue part of the flame though, as then it won't singe and discolor your thread. So, one of our lining slip pockets, I'm just going to line that up along the edge. I'm going to tack it down within the seam allowance the whole way around. So you can use any stitch length. I'm keeping mine on 4. You can go back to 2 if you want to, if you're more comfortable there. But I'm just doing it well within the seam allowance. I'm holding my hand on it to keep it as flat as possible. And now, to me, that's too big of a slip pocket. That's not going to age well. So you can either put a line in the middle or a line to the side or 2 lines. You can pick what kind of pockets you want. I'm going to go 1 line at 2/3 because that's what I like to do. I like a bigger pocket and a smaller pocket. So if you've got a book, you can put the book in one side and then your phone in the other. So I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to stitch straight up and then I'm going to back stitch at the top as well. And so now my slip pocket over time won't sag as much, but I can still fit big items in it. So that's that side done. Now we're going to do the zipper pocket. So I've got my piece. I'm going to fold this in half like that, and then I'm going to grab my ruler. I've only got my big one. My smaller one's over there because I was cutting things out. And I'm going to measure down, across, and then depending on what size zipper, different people like different size zipper boxes. So personally, I like 3/8, unless I'm cutting it out of vinyl, and then I like a 1/2 inch so that you can see a little bit more of the zipper tape as opposed to just the zip. Personal preference, suit yourself. So I'm going to line this up. Now, if you want to line it up in the center, the easiest way to do that is fold this in half, clip the center, and then clip the center of the side that you drew on, because that will sit in like down, and then you can just line them up with a ruler like this, if that's how you want to do it. I want mine up higher, so I want mine about there. So if I line that up like that, it just needs to scooch to there. And that's the quickest way that I like to line it up. Center, center, done. Except that is crooked. Bottom, bottom, there. To be honest, I actually eyeball it because I've done this so many times. You just want to make sure that this doesn't shift. As waterproof canvas, well, at least my waterproof canvas I sell is a bit slippery when it touches itself, whereas cotton's a lot more kind of gripping, so it's less likely to shift on you while you're stitching it. I'm going to trim off all of the tails like that. And then I'm going to grab my scissors, fold it in half so I can get to the middle of that box and just do a really small clip. The bigger you do, the more chance you've got of it being too crooked and like not being able to be bent and folded properly. So I like to do a really, really small clip that's only just big enough to get the scissors in. So if you've cut it crooked, it doesn't matter. So as I get about 1/2 inch from the end, I'm triangling out those corners, which is literally just make the corners a triangle. Like that. See the little triangle? So now, if this is cotton with an iron this side down, and then flip it, and iron this side down. Then we push it through the hole. In my case, I can finger press it because it's the waterproof canvas. But if you've got interfacing and cotton on stuff, iron it. And then that should go on that edge really, really nicely. Sometimes I just have to Tory squish the corners. You want some cheese? Yeah. We can do some cheese. Crisis is over. So we're going to take our zip, and I always like mine to close to the left. So I'm going to lay that like that, and then just make sure that this is flat and open, and lay it over the top of the zipper. And then I'm just going to stitch around. So I'm just going to stitch this with a normal stitch length, like a joining one. You can make it decorative if you wish. You could also add a vinyl accent around this pocket. I'm going to zip the zipper open so that I'm not stitching around the zipper pull because it distorts the stitches. And we don't want to do that. I'm going to stop with my needle down and then zip it up the other way. And then just stitch it shut and back stitch it in that corner. And then trim my tails. So now your pocket, I know I've creased it, but your pocket should now just fold down and be even. So I always do it with the top up. I'm just going to fold this over and then stitch down the side. And then trim off my tails. Because I don't want a whole bunch of them in my way later. So I'm going to do it all now. I'm also back stitching at both ends to lock the stitches in so they don't come undone later. So that's now that done. Before we join the bag, I am going to stitch all of my straps together because I don't want to run out of bobbin thread halfway through a strap. So I'm going to do these differently today. I'm just doing a single layer and I'm going to fold the center. I'm going to fold to the center instead of in half. And then I'm going to top stitch it so that it won't open. So I'm going to top stitch basically 1/8 of an inch each side of the center and do my straps this way. So this will just make for a thinner strap. But while doing this, you want to make sure that you're really closing the gap between them because it will be seen. It'll be the inside of the strap, but it will still be seen. You could also have just folded them in half, or you could get a fabric accent and stick it over the top. I didn't want the fabric on the handles. I don't know. I like the look of all the vinyl with this fabric. Okay. So now that that's done, back up to a joining stitch length. And I'm going to start in the center, which is not normally something I do, but let's do that. Then I'm going to pivot and go across that end. And then we're going to go back down the other side. And then I'm just going to finish off the end by going across because I did it at the other end and I like a symmetry. So that's the strap. It's subtle, but it's different. So that's one. And now we're going to grab the second one. And we can even do the shoulder strap in the same fashion so that they all kind of match. And it's like a look that we're going for. Oh, and he's back in the fridge. Apparently he's finished all his cheese already. I might go check on that. So I'm just going to finish off all of these straps in that same way. So I'm going to fold them into the center and then top stitch 1/8 of an inch each side of the join. Alrighty, all my straps are done, as in sewed. So now I'm going to attach the hardware to my shoulder strap. So we're going to take our strap adjuster. These are the old style I used to sell. I'm just using up the rest of them. There's nothing wrong with them. I just prefer the new ones. So I'm going to put it on. I'm going to leave, what is that? Just over 1 inch. And I'm going to do the zigzag because I like the zigzag. So I'm going to start up against the hardware. And I'm going to do a couple of stitches and then back stitch just to lock it in. And then we're going to stitch across the top. And then I'm going to go diagonally down to the raw edge. And then across the bottom of the raw edge. And then diagonally back up to where we started. And that is a nice strong way that is also neat to finish your strap. So, with the join side up, I'm going to put the join side on the flat part of the swivel clasp and then feed it up one side of the strap connector and then down the other side like this. So it should be sitting nice and smooth like that. And then again, the join side against the flat side of the other end of the swivel clip. And then we're going to do the zigzag end again. So I always start against the hardware so that I don't overstitch. Oops, that was one stitch too far over. Diagonally down, across, and I'm leaving about 1/8 of an inch on the edge of everything. And then we're going to back stitch when we get back to the start and trim all the tails. So your strap is now complete, so you can pop that aside. And we'll put our other straps on the bag at the very end. So now we're up to construction. I always start with lining. Lining is more pliable, so it's easier to attach the lining first and then the outside parts later, because the outside parts are always thicker. So I'm going to fold it in half and find the center of the top, and I already did the bottom of this one. So I'm going to come and do the same thing to here. So I'm going to line it up, center bottom, center top. Or you can do center top, center bottom. Doesn't matter which order. Like that. And then we're going to grab our awesome loopy pin. And I'm going to find the center of the base piece. Because that should be the center. Because all your seam allowances should be the same. If you're worried, measure it all the way back. And then I also want to find center top. So I'm going to fold this over. And that's center top there. And then same with the other side. So I'm just matching up the seam allowances and then squishing it. There's nothing magical about it. And I'm also, I don't need to find center bottom because I already found it when I lined up my thing. But if you don't have that, definitely find center bottom. I've got these 2 little marks. So I'm going to open the zipper is the first thing I want to do because we want to be able to get into the bag later. And if you think about it now, you don't have to think about it again. So I'm going to start at the bottom. I'm going to grab one of the pieces. Now, it doesn't necessarily matter which piece you grab, unless you care which way your zippers are going. So my zipper here will finish over here. So if I want the zippers to go the same way, then this piece has to attach to this piece. So that's something you can think about. But it's not a big deal if it doesn't because both sides have pockets. So it's not something you have to do, it's just something you may wish to do. Or if you've added extra pockets everywhere, You might want to do it that way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clip the center and then one each side of the center. So that's going to hold it in place. And then we're going to come, I'm going to clip it over to this edge like that. And then do the same on the other end. Now, if you're feeling confident, you can skip the clips. If I made this bag a few times, I reckon I could skip most of the clipping I've been doing. But the first time I make a bag, I always like to clip, just so I can get a feel for what's going on. So I'm now going to stitch seam to seam. But like this. I'm using my normal joining seam allowance. Because this bag has like a tight change of direction, I'm just going to clip the fabric right up to near the seam, like that. Now I'm going to take the bottom and I'm going to line up the bottom center, and I'm going to put my clips towards the gusset piece. The first bit didn't matter because we were just going seam to seam. This piece, however, so we want to make sure that these are folded towards the base. So we're going to stick a clip right on that so that it has no chance to move. And then we're going to continue down till we get to this corner or curve. And then I'm going to put my thumbs along that edge and push it into the curve so that I can sew it without lumps and bumps. Here comes my child again. Lockdown is going to make these videos a little more difficult, but I am determined to get them done. So they just might be a little bit shorter than normal because I'll only do half of it on video and half of it off. Yes, sweetie. Hi, Josie. What's going on?
Hi, see.
Can you see what? Sure.
What is this?
It's Mummy's bracelet.
Can I touch it?
Of course you can.
I love it.
Fantastic. Do you want to say hello to everybody?
Hello, everybody.
Oh, you're so cute.
Hi, everybody.
They won't answer back. They can't see you yet. What are you doing? You don't want to watch TV?
Can you help with that?
Can I help with what?
Yeah. I want to talk to everybody.
Well, we're not live, so we can't talk to everybody right now, okay?
Can we drive?
Can we drive? Drive to where? Do you want to drive to the horses?
I'm going to drive to talk to my friends.
Okay, I'll be back. We're going to leave it there. I'll come back. Alrighty. We are back. We'll see how long this lasts for. So I'm going to start at this seam. I'm going to make sure that the outer piece is out of the way, and I'm just going to stitch down and around to the other seam. So I'm going to start here and back stitch, and then around we go. So I've got it with the gusset side up to stitch it, because it always just works better if you do it this way. I'm not trying to tell you how to do stuff, but I promise it works better this way. You also want to make sure that those base pieces are facing towards the center bottom. Up we go, and then again I'm going to pull that outer piece out of the way, and we're going to get back to that top stitch and chop it off. So then you just want to have a look on the inside and make sure that there's no tucks or pinches, but we're fine. You also want to make sure that this is open. And we're going to trim off these edges, but we'll do that later. I have ordered myself a new pair of pinking shears, or zigzag scissors, as I prefer to call them. They are on their way. I'm kind of hoping they'll be here today. Probably this afternoon, but still. I got hubby to try and sharpen my other ones, but I think I'd wrecked them beyond repair, unfortunately. So, we're going to come to the top again. And we're going to join the top to the top in the center. So the little nicks, this is why I do nicks, it's just easier to see. And then we're going to clip it from center to the seam that we made at the side. And your fabric from your main piece, I should point this out, it will overhang a little bit because that's part of your seam allowance. So don't freak out that it doesn't fit perfectly within that stitching because it's actually meant to. So there it is there, and then this hangs past the seam allowance amount. So don't worry about that, it's meant to happen. Seasoned bag makers will know that, but if you're a beginner and you want to make this bag, just be aware that that's meant to happen and you haven't done anything wrong. So, again, this way up, and I'm going to start at that seam from our zipper. We're going to back stitch, and then we're going to sew along. I'm just going to pull these off as I go. I also have to keep an eye on my bobbin. I don't know how much I've got left. And when I get back to that seam, I'm going to back stitch, and then I'm just going to use my snips to snip the fabric so that the sides are more pliable. And I'm going to trim off those tails because they're already annoying me. See how you can just see random ones? If you don't trim them as you go, they just get a little bit out of control. Okay. So now we want to attach this side to this side. However, this is where it's probably, I don't know if they did this in the pattern or not, but we're going to do it. So I'm just going to put one in the center, and I'm going to come out to the base, and where it joins, I'm going to put one there. And then I'm going to do that on the other side, and I'm going to put one there, and I can take out that middle one. So I'm going to leave the bottom of the bag open to turn it through here, because this is a bigger space than my zipper pocket. It's also easier to turn through the base, and then I can just stitch this up later. So I'm going to come up to the top bit where we just stopped stitching. And I'm going to put all of this into here, and I'm also making sure all of my clips are facing the gusset piece. And the main reason for that is because it's easier to pull them off as you're stitching. As you saw before, it just makes for quicker stitching. So I've done there, and then I'm going to come to this end, and I'm going to do the same thing again. So you just want to make sure everything's lining up, and if you need to, you put your thumbs at like a corner, and then you push it into that curve to make sure that it's all going to fit. Sometimes you need to do it, and sometimes you don't. It's one of those things. We're going to do it this time. So we're going to add a lot of clips because we're pushing it to the 3D object that it is. See how I've got that curve happening? It's so I can see where any issues are going to be and adjust all of the excess fabric accordingly. So it's a neat trick. Push it out. Make the curve with your thumbs. So this is now what we've got. So I'm going to stitch from here to that clip, and then I'm going to stop, and I'm going to stitch from that clip to there. Or I can stitch it both down towards the bottom. It doesn't matter which way. We want to start up here. We're going to stitch, and we're going to back stitch. I'm going to pull these clips off as we go. I'm going to go around the curve, and I'm going to stop right there and back stitch. And trim the tails. We'll trim off all the excess in a minute, just bear with me. Then we're going to come to this corner. We're going to start here, we're going to back stitch.
Mom?
Yes, sweetie.
What is that?
I thought I made you a deal. I give you a lollipop and you go hang out there. Hey? What are you doing? Dad's in the bedroom if you want to go wake him up.
Sure.
Okay, so that's all done. Now we're going to do the outer pieces. Same thing again. We need to find the center. Oh, that was pretty funny. He just went in there and yelled, "Wake up."
Can you hold that?
Oh no. Alright, I'm back again. We'll see how we go. So, I have found the center of the main panels so that I can match them up to the centers, and we're just going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to find the center here and clip it. And we're just going to do that top edge first. Now this is going to be thicker, so you might have to go slower for this because you've got to remember you've got all the straps, the vinyl accents. I've used vinyl for the zipper panel, so this will definitely be thicker. You don't want to go full speed through thickness, especially if you're on domestic, you'll snap a needle. That's my main hate. One day it will flick up and get me. Alright, so we're going across the top. And again, we're going to have that seam allowance overhang, and that is totally normal, so don't freak out about that. Oops, dropped my scissors. That's fine. So, gusset piece up / zipper piece up so I can see where the seam starts. And I'm just going to start right there. So we're going to stitch, we're going to back stitch. You want to make sure that we're getting all the way to the other side and then back stitch. Now my snips won't cut this the way it did the lining because it's much, much thicker. So instead I am going to grab my Class A knife edge scissors. And I'm not telling you this because it's sponsored. I'm just telling you this so you know what scissors I use. Not fancy enough to ever be sponsored. Right, so I'm just putting a little clip so that it can bend for the sides. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing as we did for the other side, except that we are going to stitch all the way around both of them. So I want all of my clips to face the gusset. I was doing it right the first time. So I'm going around, and then when I get to that curve, I'm just going to stop and go the other way. So do the flat part first because it's easier. It's always easy to clip the straight bit. Then I'm going to switch to up here. And I want to make them face the gusset piece again. Like this. Now, if you were worried about thicknesses, you could have made your fleece pieces, or if you've used foam, the seam allowance amount smaller so that you wouldn't be stitching them. I'm not super worried. Fleece isn't that thick for my machine. It can handle it fine. So that's why I decided to just put it in the seams. So I've got this last little bit. So I'm going to do that thing with my thumbs where I push it out and then attach clips. You'll always notice I put more clips on a corner than I do on a straight. It's because you want to hold it in place as you're pulling them off still. So then we're just going to come back up to this top bit. And I'm going to come along and clip a bunch of stuff at the end. So I'm going to clip off all the excess fabric in one big fell swoop. So then again, I've got the edge. So there's the center, and then you can just kind of clip outwards each way. There's lots of different ways that you can work out your curves. There's like 3 ways in this video so far. So that's now what I've got. So I'm going to do gusset side up. I'm going to start at the last lot of stitching. I'm going to back stitch. I'm on a joining stitch length. I'm cleaning out my clips as I go so that they don't annoy me. This is why we put them up the right way. They're much easier to do. Back up to the top stitching and back stitch. Pull it out, trim your tails, go back to the start, trim those tails. We have one side in. Looks good. There doesn't appear to be any kind of glitches in my corners, but if you are worried, you can look through. Well, actually, you don't even need to look through. You can just look from here. But it looks lovely. I know you can't really see that, but it's fine. So, other side, final side. Now remember, we're going to stitch all the way around this. We're going to start with that top, because that's like corner to corner. And making sure that all the seams are lining up as I go. And again, this should go slightly past your stitching, which is why we're sewing it the way that we are. If you wanted to, you could potentially curve these corners out more and make it more rounded, but then it's going to change the shape of the bag. So that's why I like doing it the way I'm doing it. So, zip a piece up, start at the stitching, stitch it, back stitch it, move along. All the way to the other stitching, and then back stitch to there. Trim off my tails. My bin's getting a little bit full, but that's okay. Grab my scissors and then trim. You don't want to go all the way to the stitches, just really close to them. We're actually going to trim out all of this corner excess, but just in a minute. Not yet. We're not there yet. Okay, so now we're going to go to the bottom. Line the bottom up with the bottom. Now I've got different brands of clips in my stash here. So the all purple ones are, I think they're a Clover brand, and they are like $32 for 50. Then I have these ones, which are $100 for $16. These ones are stiffer and hold better, but it's also good to just have some cheap ones. These ones die a bit quicker than these ones, but these ones are very expensive. So I like to kind of have both in my stash, so that I use the coloured ones for like the bulk of stuff, and then anything that you want to have like extra hold, I use the purple ones. So I'm going to get to the corner, and then I'm going to stop and come back up the top, and we'll work my way down. And I always like to have the curve away, so when I'm pushing it out, it's easier to do from here. That's just my personal way of doing it, because my thumbs are easier to do that than try and bring them in. I don't know, it's just my thing. Right, other side. Up to the top. Grab some more clips. Work my way down. Hubby's up now, so the only other interruption we are going to get is if I get another delivery, which is a very real possibility. I'm expecting one today, but it also could come tomorrow because of COVID. All right, clips all the way around. So again, we're going to start up here. We're going to start at the last lot of stitching. We're going to stitch down. We're going to back stitch. And around we go. So again, gusset side up, and I just ran out of bobbin thread. I could hear it. So I'm going to add some of those clips back on, like that, and wind a bobbin. That's right, the rest of this bobbin I will be using for the wallet that I'm doing to match. So the matching wallet to this one is going to be Marilyn by Lynn's Handmade. So I've already cut that out ready to go, but I'm not making it until next week. So, with my bobbin, I always do it until it snaps off. Then I'm going to grab my bottle of oil, and I'm just going to put a couple of drops on the bobbin case. Now I know I say it in every video, but I'm going to say it again. I do have a video on where to put it. If you have an industrial machine, it is advised by my machine technician guy that you put this on every time you wind a bobbin, and you basically never have to get it serviced until something goes wrong. Which so far has held true for me. You'll also notice this will sound quieter. And you want to run it at full speed, because what it does is it circulates all the oil into the machine. So especially if you're a slower sewer, there's nothing wrong with that. But by running your bobbin at full speed, you're oiling the entirety of the inside of your machine. Again, I'm not making this up. This is what the technician taught me. And I never do my bobbins all the way full. I only do them about 3/4 of the way full, because when I do them full, they tend to knot and play up, and then I lose a bunch of thread anyway. So I just stop at 3/4, and I find I have a lot less issues. That's just my personal experience. I'm sure if they were pre-wound bobbins, they'd work differently, but you can't get them in all the colours I need, so it's not a thing. So I only re-thread the bottom half of my machine. The top half I just cut off and pull through, which I'm sure you just saw me do, because it's quicker, and I'm all about efficiency. I have a lot to do in every day of my life. So I'm just going to start a couple of stitches back from where we left off. So I'm going to stitch and back stitch, just like before. And then we're going to stitch. Can you hear how much quieter that machine is? I can hear it. I don't know if you can hear it in the camera. But it sounds quieter. And that is probably because I pre-wound 2 bobbins before this video, so it didn't have its oil in between. And don't put too much oil. If you accidentally put too much oil, just run like a scrap of fabric through a couple of times to soak up any excess oil you may have accidentally put into your machine. Alright. Now before we go trimming off all this excess that I do plan on doing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch the top to the the zipper part. I'm going to stitch the top lining to the top exterior, just within the seam allowance, so you won't see it. What this is going to do is it's going to hold your zipper up in the bag so that it's not going to sag, and that way your lining won't sag. You can do this with pretty much every pattern. And then we're going to come and we're going to do it to this side. So I'm not stitching all the way to the seam, but I'm doing most of it. Not going to lie, I'm doing most of it. And what that does is that holds your lining up, so it's going to look beautiful. Now, sharp scissors, or zigzag scissors if your zigzag scissors are sharp. And we're just going to chop off like half of the seam allowance that's there. So you want to get it down to about half. The reason you don't want to go more than half is because then you'll get too close to the stitches and it's more likely that something will pop and break, and we don't want that. But I'm cutting the reason we cut this off is this excess is going to stop the lining from sitting snugly in the bag. So by cutting off this excess, you're allowing the lining to move further out. We're going to cut the lining as well. We cut all of this off. And some of you might be going, well, why don't we just make that the seam allowance? And the official answer is because it gives you more leniency around your curves, which is important. And 1/4 inch, you quite often miss bits, especially if things aren't lined up 100% perfect. So it's a good way to have, you know, more give. And then you can always just trim it down like this. It's not really a waste if it's made you make the bag way easier and quicker. Okay, and then We're going to do the same with the lining. And again, the reason for this is because now this lining is going to sit snugly inside the bag and it won't be fighting against all this extra fabric. Because it's this stuff that stops it sitting neatly. So by trimming a lot of it off, you're allowing this to get more into the corner. Right, in the bin. Now, with this piece, because we haven't turned the bag through yet, I am going to stop like halfway through the corner like that. We're also going to trim it off, but that's after we've stitched the base closed. You can also trim off any excess you've got going on up near the zipper. Like that, and that's just going to help it sit better. So we put our hand into our giant hole, which should be quite easy, and then I'm just going to push that corner in so that I can grab it and I've got something to hold on to. And then I just pull it out of the bag. And because we left such a giant hole, look how easy that was. Alright, so I'm just going to come in and kind of push with my fingers on all of the seams so it all starts sitting out nicely. And then I'm going to put my hand into the zipper pocket and grab the open base. Now I always like to leave the opposite side base open to where the zipper pocket is. So I'll never leave it on the same side. It's actually quite difficult to pull through. So here's my base. And I'm still going to sew it gusset side up. Now if you need to, definitely pin this or clip it or whatever, but I'm going to be fine. I've done this enough now that I don't necessarily need to clip it. You can just kind of pull it in sections. But that is now the base of the lining closed. So while it's out, we can just take the scissors and trim off the excess so that it will sit nicer. Like that. And then we just push it back through, like so. And then I'm going to pull the pocket lining through like this, and I'm going to take my fingers and just tuck in that raw edge and top stitch it down. Now a good way to do this is I always put my finger seam to seam, and then I'm just going to finger crease it. If you can't finger crease it, feel free to iron it, or you could clip it. So I'm just using my normal joining stitch length and back stitching at the end. If you had a tag, you could definitely pop it in there, but I've got that on the base, so I don't need a tag for this one. I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of push out the corners of the lining piece. Then I'm going to push all of the lining piece into the bag. And then when we turn the lining in, you'll notice that your zipper part sits very, very flat. And that's because we stitched it to the outer. So there's the bag done for the most part. This will need a Tory squish along this seam here. So you just roll it in your fingers and then violently shake it in opposite directions. What this does is it helps to create the seam or a crease in your vinyl so that it's all going to sit nicer. Sometimes you might even need to get your fingers up underneath like this and then squish it. So I will eventually do that to all of the bag. I'm not going to do it now, so you don't need to watch all of it. So the last thing left to do is to attach our handles, because our shoulder strap is already done. So I tend to just store that in the bag, especially when I'm storing it until it sells. And even when it does sell, I leave it in the bag as an option. I don't attach it. So we're going to need I'm going to use rivets, but you can stitch these on if you want to. I just like rivets, really. I think they add a touch of class. And they're quicker. Let's be honest, they're quicker. But they still look cool, and why not? So I'm going to measure, and this is how I do it for all straps. So different companies may do it different ways, but this is just a blanket way that I do it. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch up from the end and mark it. Now, because I use skinny square rings, I'm going to mark 1 inch up from there. But if I use the chunky square rings, I would measure up 1 1/4. You need that extra 1/4 inch to be able to get around. So I'm going to go 1/2, and then I'm going to go 1 inch up from that mark, which makes it 1 1/2 from the edge, I guess, if you want to play that math game. I've also just got a little bit hanging over the edge, so I'm going to square that edge up nicely and then continue. 1/2 inch up, 1 inch up from there, 1/2 inch up, and 1 inch up from there. And again, it would be 1 1/4 if it's chunky or circular. So I have 25mm rings, but they actually only work out to need 3/4 inch straps, and I always give them that extra little bit as well. So now that I've done that, I'm going to take my hole punch, and I'm just going to punch all the holes individually. Now I'm super lucky that I've got 2 of these, so pretty much they are always set up as hole punch and rivet, and then I just change them if I'm doing grommets. But one will be the hole punch for the grommets, and then one will be the grommet inserts. So one of these is always punching holes, and the other one's always like attaching stuff. Just because I got 1 1/2 price sale. So Green Beans occasionally do them for like $22. So plus postage, it works out to its normal price, but without postage, which is kind of nice. I won't get a 3rd one, that's excessive, but 2 definitely works out for me quite well. So I'm going to thread up from the bottom, because when the strap's attached, I want the raw edge part to be on the inside. Now, if I had those really cool bag ends, which I am contemplating getting because they look cool, I would do this the opposite way so that the bag end would hang outside and it would be a feature. Because if you're going to hide them on the inside, there's no point in using them. So I would put these in the opposite way if I've got the bag end pieces. So then I always just run my hand down to make sure there's no curves into it, so I don't have a twisted strap, and then I go up from the bottom again. So again, you would do this the opposite way if you were using the fancy strap end pieces. And then I'm just going to rivet that on. And then we're going to twist it around and do the same thing again. So up and in. It doesn't matter if you do left or right first. And it also doesn't matter if post goes front to back or back to front. Unless you're using single capped rivets. In which case it does matter. And you put the hole to the back. So then the other one goes in here, and then up and in. And because I've done that 1 inch, this goes on, but it's not crazy tight, which is important. You don't want your vinyl to be tight around your square ring, because then it's more likely going to stretch, and stretching means potential snapping. So you want to have you don't want a lot of room, but you just don't want it to be super duper tight. So there you go, guys. That bag is done. It just needs a good Tory squish everywhere, and it will be fantastic and ready for sale. So I always squish them before I'm selling them. And somebody asked this question, so I'm just going to answer it here. I always post my bags in a box so that Australia Post doesn't wreck them. You can get different size boxes. You can order custom ones. Like if you make the same bag over and over and over, you can get a custom box made. They're not that expensive, so that it perfectly fits it without a lot of space. But I will always send these in a box because it's just more protective of the bag. Wallets, sometimes I will send in a satchel, unless I've got small boxes. But most people who order from me order a matching set. So the wallet will go inside the bag and then the bag will go in a box. Anyway, guys, I hope that was helpful. And I will see you all for the next tutorial. Bye-bye.